Hello there. Thank you for tuning into Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of the 2024 election. In advance of the August 13th primary, we are talking tonight with two candidates running for the Democratic nomination for Lieutenant Governor. Those candidates are David Zuckerman, the incumbent, and Thomas Renner. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Hey,
Thank you
for having us.
Awesome. So we have a list of questions prepared that you've both received, and you'll have 90 seconds to answer each question. If you're tuning in live, we also welcome your questions at 802-862-3966. You can call in and we will do our best to prioritize your question and screen your call. We'll make sure that calls are directed at both of the candidates here, not just one candidate in particular. And you can also submit questions for future forums at cctv.org/primary, where you'll also find the schedule for our other forums this election season. So let's jump in. Let's start with opening statements. Thank you both for being here. And we'll start with you, David, as the incumbent, a 60-second opening statement.
Well, sure. Thank you, Bobby, for the opportunity, and CCTV. Appreciate it. Thank you to the folks out there, I'm not sure, I guess it's that camera, who are watching today to learn more about both me and my opponent as you consider who to vote for on August 13th. I was inspired by Bernie, and I've been your public servant for 24 of 28 years with service in the House, the Senate, and as Lieutenant Governor. And I've worked really hard for you, fighting to raise the minimum wage, invest in more affordable housing, reduce your exposure to toxic chemicals. I've led on civil rights like marriage equality and criminal justice reform. And I've worked hard to address the opioid crisis and supported the harm reduction site in Burlington. I've worked tirelessly on the issue of climate change, both as a political figure, but also on my own regenerative organic farm in Heinsberg. Many of you have seen me at the Burlington Farmers Market. I know that the education funding system has been hurting a lot of Vermonters, and we know that the wealthiest Vermonters actually pay a lower rate of taxes than working class Vermonters, and a third of the second homes in Vermont pay a lower tax rate than Vermonters, and we have to change both of those things. Finally, I'll close by saying the Senate will have at least 15, maybe even 16 first or second term senators in the upcoming session. And I think it's important to have experience at the podium, as so many folks are learning the process and the decorum and the respect of the Senate body and people's input. So I would hope that experience would also be something you'd take into account. While I was a legislator fighting for you, I also started my farm. It's been 25 years, and I thank you for having me, and I hope you'll consider me for the August 13th vote.
Thank you so much, David.
Yeah.
Thomas Renner, your opening statement.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Town Meeting TV. Thanks for having me. And Bobby, thank you for moderating. And thanks to everybody who is watching. I'm Thomas Renner. I'm the Deputy Mayor of Winooski. And in Winooski, we have been doing some amazing things. Housing, opportunity, affordability. These are all things that we've been working on, and these are things that I will work on as Lieutenant Governor. As I've been crossing the state up and down, left and right, I have been hearing from people about those very issues, so very excited to tackle those. I've spent my career working for some of Vermont's most respected politicians. I first started working for Senator Leahy. Most recently, I've worked for Congresswoman Ballot. I've also worked in the state's healthcare sector. I've been dedicated to one thing through this work, to helping Vermonters, to addressing the issues that Vermonters care about and the issues that come up in their lives and dealing with those. As a municipal leader, I've had my ear to the ground, quite literally, listening to the things that people are concerned about and trying to deal with those. And I've heard similar issues as I've been campaigning. We do have issues in Vermont that we need to address, but I believe that together we can work on those issues and we can thrive and we can keep growing a Vermont that we want. I'm running as Lieutenant Governor to bring a voice to Montpelier that hasn't been there, a diverse voice, a new voice, a different voice, a working class voice. I'm really happy to be here today. I'm really happy to be running to represent every single Vermonter as Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Bobby.
Great. Thank you both so much for being here. David Zuckerman, Thomas Renner, two candidates running for the Democratic nomination for Lieutenant Governor. A reminder that you can call in with your questions for these candidates at 802-862-3966. Until we receive a call, though, we'll move forward with the questions we have.
Sounds good.
So we've got a question here about property taxes and education on a lot of folks' minds right now. This year, many Vermonters will see a double-digit increase in their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budgets failed on town meeting day.
Yeah.
So the question, as Lieutenant Governor, how would you approach education funding and property taxes for the coming year? And we'll start with you, Thomas Renner.
Sure, thank you. So it's definitely something that is at the top of every Vermonter's mind. My husband and I got our property tax bill in recently, and it was jarring. We need to figure out how we're going to pay for that. As I speak to folks as I travel across the state, people understand why we are paying so much for education, but it's still something that really hurts their pocketbooks. And while I was in Winooski as deputy mayor, I worked tirelessly to make sure that our property taxes were as reduced as they possibly could be. Of course, I wasn't on the school board, so there was nothing I could do there. But I went to bat for regular Winooski residents to reduce the tax rate that was proposed by the city manager, because I knew that people couldn't afford it. And that's what I would do as lieutenant governor, and continue to share those stories and work to make sure that Vermonters have a Vermont that's affordable for them. And also, we need to look at new revenue streams for education funding. We can't just rely on property taxes. We need to look at new ways to fund education, because it's important. We want to make sure that Vermont students receive the best education that they can. And to do that, we're going to have to look at new revenue streams.
Great. Thanks so much, Thomas. David Zuckerman, your thoughts on property taxes and education?
Sure. So I was in the legislature when they originally passed Act 60, and that greatly equalized the opportunity for kids in property-poor towns to get a good education. That law is now over 20 years old, and we've seen it get changed and altered, and now, of course, costs are way too high for most folks, and we know that. One thing that folks don't know as much about is that working class people pay a higher percentage of their income for education than the wealthiest in Vermont. If we simply adjusted the formula so that everybody paid based on income, it would be about a $30 million shift in a reduction in taxes for working class people, and a little bit more on those making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Also, little known fact is that during the Phil Scott administration, while he said no new taxes, he's actually moved a lot of expenses onto the Ed Fund from what used to be human services budget in state government, about $60 million or more. I went to the governor 8 years ago to say, let's look at the combined cost of human services and education. Let's look at the double bureaucracy. Let's look at the lack of communication, and really work to change those policies. I will continue to do that. And currently, I've been attending all of the beginnings of the meetings of the Commission on Education. And I plan to not only chime in at those meetings when the public can chime in, but also publish newsletters, as I have as Lieutenant Governor, to thousands of citizens across the state about what they're talking about, how it's going to affect people, and how we can make education both more affordable and better for our kids. Vermont is one of the best education systems in the country, but that's rarely talked about because people want to slam on public education. And I'm proud of having the teachers' endorsement as well because of my standing up for teachers and our kids.
Thank you both so much. Do we have a question? I'm seeing there's, okay, so we've got a question on the line here. We'll bring the caller online. Hello there, you're on Town Meeting TV. Can you share your, where you're calling from and your question for both candidates? Oh, are they there? Oh, let's see. I think I pressed the right button here. Let's see if...
Or try again.
Well, if we didn't get you on the air this time, maybe just try calling in again. For some reason, that button didn't work. We're going to move on to the next question here, which is about housing and emergency shelter. So Vermont reported 3,295 people experiencing homelessness in 2023. That's up from just over 1,000 people in 2020. This summer, the state is rolling back its continuing to roll back its pandemic-era emergency shelter capacity across the state, which pushes hundreds more Vermonters onto the streets. Yeah. So how would you approach the need for housing and emergency shelter as a lieutenant governor, and how should we pay for it? And we'll start with you, David Zuckerman.
Sure, well, there's a few things here. One of the things that COVID did was it really rejiggered how all of us think. I've been attending the homeless shelter count on the State House lawn for decades, where every year the announcement goes out. We have 1,100 or 1,200 or 1,400 folks who live on the streets. And we were trying to raise that awareness. I had supported a $2 hotel room surcharge to create funding and money for more affordable housing and more shelters and more opportunities for people not to have to live on the streets. We then got tons of COVID money. That's run out. I supported a version of the housing bill that came out of the House that was going to put a 3% marginal tax rate on those making over $500,000 a year. That was a 10-year plan to put $75 million a year into affordable housing. We can build all the housing we want in Vermont. we don't have enough builders to build it fast enough to supply the demand. And so we have to not only address more housing, but we have to make sure we actually take community resources from those who can most afford it to subsidize the price. Otherwise, we're just not going to get to where we need to be to have enough housing that everybody can live in it. And we know that housing is the fundamental basis for sort of human rights and success, whether it's mental health issues created by people living without housing and that insecurity, or people on the edge of not having housing, that comes from the housing crisis. Whether it's health issues that people face, that comes from not having the right housing or any housing. So this is an investment we have to make in order to address so many of the social justice issues in our state.
Thank you, David. Thomas, your thoughts on housing?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for this question, because it's something that is really personal and dear to me. I have a family member right now who is experiencing housing difficulty due to a no-cause eviction. So I know that we have a deep housing crisis, and that there are folks, regular Vermonters, who are being impacted by it every single day. You know, what David was mentioning, we need to look at new tax forms, particularly on folks who make over $400,000 a year. A year. If we can generate that money from Vermonters who are doing well, who have taken advantage of the amazing things that Vermont has to offer to build a business or to succeed, we can ask those folks to participate in the community a little more. By doing that and setting that aside, we can have that extra money for the state to have an investment in the housing crisis. We know that we need to build, and we need to build at all levels. We see the housing crisis impacting everybody, not just folks who don't have a home at all, but folks who want to move to Vermont and folks who are trying to change their living situation in Vermont. So building is really important, and making sure that we have a legislature and that our municipalities are also creating policies and editing their planning and zoning, like we have done in Winooski, in order to have good building policies. And we need to make sure that as we are doing this approach, as we are trying to house people, that we're doing it with dignity. When somebody is without a home, they are at the bottom of where they really could be. And as David mentioned, you know, there's so much else that goes on with that, with being houseless. So we need to make sure that we're doing it with dignity. We need to make sure that we're building, and we need to make sure that we're getting the resources so that we can do that building.
Great, thank you both so much. We're going to try again on the phones here. Let's see if we can. Hello there, you're on Town Meeting TV. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay, so can you share your name, where you're calling from, and your question for both the candidates tonight?
Sure. My name is Lee, and I live in Burlington. And my question is, so I've seen in the media that conservative Republicans have donated thousands of dollars to Democratic candidates during this campaign season. Would you accept donations from people who support causes that are opposed to democratic values? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that question. Question about accepting donations from donors that are opposed to democratic values, and we'll start with Thomas Renner on this question, 90 seconds.
Sure, thank you very much for that question. So the unfortunate thing about campaigns is you have to raise money to make it work. I wish that wasn't the case. It's also very easy to raise money when you've been a politician for a very long time, or if you come from money or have connections to money. I'm not one of those people. I don't have connections to money, nor do I have any money. So the donations that I receive, I'm very thankful for. I'm thankful for anybody who wishes to support my campaign. And I haven't been going over every single donation that comes in. What I will say is, if somebody believes in a candidate and they donate to them, I think that they're doing so because they believe in that candidate. People have different opinions on every single issue. What I know is, I believe in democratic policies. I've been a Democrat my entire life. I'm involved in the Democratic Party, both at the statewide, county level, and the town level. I'm a Democrat through and through, and I believe in, you know, protecting a woman's right to choose, affordable health care, housing, uplifting minority voices. Yeah, that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Thomas. David, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I've never solicited money nor gotten any that I know of in any kind of significant amount from people who are sort of diametrically opposed to the values that I have. I think in this cycle what we're seeing is some of those Republicans are giving in certain races where they really want to defeat the people that are not quite where they are. And in whether this race or some other races, the folks who are donating that money They're folks that have been highly opposed to Bernie. They're highly opposed to me. They don't want someone who's outspoken about the fact that our society for the last 40 years has moved the economic system to concentrate wealth at the top. And basically, that's why we're hitting the housing challenges we have. That's why we're hitting the education funding challenges that we have. That's why we're hitting the climate issues that we have, and solutions sometimes come up with affecting working class people. People like me have been very outspoken about the fact that our society has concentrated wealth in the hands of a few, and it's time for those folks to pitch in so that we can address these societal challenges. They don't want me in this office. That's okay. I hope folks will counter that money with their vote and give it to me.
Great. Thank you both so much for your response to that question. We'll move on now without another call here, as far as I can tell, to a question about criminal justice and public safety. This past session, lawmakers increased judicial staff, increased retail theft penalties, and expanded restorative justice practices in Vermont. What are your priorities to advance public safety and criminal justice reform in Vermont? And we'll start with you, David Zuckerman.
Sure. Well, there's a number of different factors here. When you look at a lot of the crime that's happening, sometimes it's around opioid addiction and substance use disorder, whether it's theft from cars, and I've heard from many people throughout Burlington and Winooski in particular, but really across the state, of those car break-ins, looking for change, looking for something that folks can sell, the stores and the retail theft. And I did support the bill that passed to say, let's aggregate those, because at some point, you're stealing too much. And as a small business owner, I've had theft at my farm. I've had the money box taken. And you sit there at the work you've done to produce a product and run a business, and it's not a huge margin on a farm or a small business. So we have to address that, but we can't just address it. I heard somebody the other day say we just have to build more jails and put more people in jail. That's not going to solve the problem. We need to look at substance use disorder and programs like Jenna's Promise and see how we can replicate that across the state with multiple months of support so that people can get back on their feet rather than 30 days and then back out where they were. We need to look at the economic stress people are under with housing, as we talked about earlier, and recognize that if people can't afford their basic standard of living, they are going to find a way to pay for their basic bills. And sadly, some of that sometimes means theft and then being able to buy some food for the day. I very much support Michelle Boslin and other folks' work in our criminal justice reform to say prisons are not just places to store people for their crime and time and then put them out. We can actually make them into places where we actually rebuild folks so they can reintegrate into society and be productive and lower recidivism rates. These are the investments we need to make. It's not a snap solution.
Thank you, David. Thomas, your thoughts on criminal justice and public safety?
Yeah, we have to help these people before they get to the point of where they feel like they have to steal from small businesses in order to get by. There's a mental health crisis in our state and in our country, an opioid crisis, and those are the things that are fueling a lot of this behavior. I have friends who own businesses on Church Street in Burlington. The theft that they experience is real and true, and the things that they and their employees have dealt with are things that nobody should have to deal with at all. One of my friends had to move her business out of Church Street because she no longer was making any money. It was going deeply into the red because of how many items were being stolen from her store. We need to address those concerns, and we need to also make sure that we're supporting those small business owners. Some work was done in a bill that you mentioned, Bobby, but we need to make sure that the state is continuing to invest money in our prosecutors and in our courts. The prosecutors across the state are constantly saying how they don't have enough support, how they need more support, they need more people working in their offices. And if we truly want to tackle all ends of this, they are a part of that. We need to make sure that we are funding their offices at exactly what they need. And then we also, on the front end, need to make sure that we're helping people before they get to a place where they have to steal from a small business.
Great, thank you both so much. Our next question, we'll talk a little bit about the campaign trail that you both have been on. So tell us a little bit about a conversation that you've had. We know you're knocking on a lot of doors, talking with many folks across the state, both of you are. Tell us about a conversation you've had on the campaign trail and how it connects with your campaign's priorities and values. And we'll start with Thomas Renner on this question.
Yeah, so one of the great things about campaigning is that you get to run around the whole state and talk to people and hear different stories and hear all about their lives. I'm hearing a lot about housing and affordability. That's definitely top of mind, but what I really want to talk about today is at the end of a forum that I did recently, a woman approached me and she got teary-eyed before we even started talking. And I introduced myself, she introduced herself, and she told me that her grandson is a biracial gay man, and that seeing me run, she knew that she had to vote for me. She knew that she wanted to ask people to do so because she felt that her grandson deserved representation. She felt like she wanted to create a Vermont where people like her grandson feel represented, feel like they have a voice, and that conversation meant so much to me. I've had some amazing conversations with folks, but to hear from that grandmother who was just so impassioned about her grandson and what it meant that I was running and what that meant to him and to her, it was truly, truly unique.
Thanks so much, Thomas. David, what have you been hearing?
So many things. As was mentioned, property taxes and affordable housing are right at the top of the list. But I have, over the years, and including in this campaign, I've heard from people who have thanked me for my work on medical aid and dying, where they had a family member who, at the end of their life, was at peace with their family around them because of the work I did for 9 years to pass that legislation for their families and folks who are terminally ill. I've heard from a lot of people about climate issues. Obviously, we had the flooding this summer. We had the same day a year ago, massive flooding. I used to farm in the Intervale. People are really feeling the climate change impacts day to day. And folks have asked me, well, where are you on solar and wind? Because we've had no new wind turbines since Phil Scott became governor, and we shifted to a more conservative policy. I said, I'm one of the only outspoken statewide people that I know of that regularly says, we need wind, we need solar, including some solar fields. This is a future for our kids. My 18-year-old daughter, someone said, what if they put it on the wind turbine on the ridge near your farm? I said, then I'll look out at that turbine and I'll think my daughter has a future. Her generation and kids and people even older than her will have a future that 40 years from now will be a livable planet. Hearing from people who are really distraught about democracy, which we've had a change in that energy, thankfully, in the last week. I've had people who are in the doldrums around housing. I've had people in doldrums around the climate. And they're really excited when they hear that I'm going to be fighting on those issues and for those issues and continue to use my voice in that way.
Great. Thank you both. I'm a little bit jealous, frankly, of all the conversations that you've gotten to have with so many
They're
folks.
amazing.
It's great.
Sounds like
They're
it
amazing.
sounds like
It's
a
the
fun
best
time.
part.
So we've got a few minutes left. Reminder that you can call in 802-862-3966 with your question for these two candidates in the next few minutes. We'll skip now to the lightning round questions.
Sure.
And these are either yes or no questions, or they're very quick, 10 seconds or less. I know you both have a lot to say about a lot of issues, and we only have 30 minutes tonight, but we'll try to keep these questions short.
Sure.
So we'll start with a question about private schools. Do you think private schools should be funded with public dollars? And we'll start with you, David.
I don't, in general, but the system is the way it is, so we should at least limit it in any way to make sure the private schools have to meet all the same criteria and accessibility for all kids in Vermont.
Thank you. Thomas?
No, I wouldn't agree with funding private religious schools, for example.
Okay, thank you. We do have a call, so we're going to take these lightning
Sure.
round questions and then we'll get to a caller. Do you think Vermont should raise the age of family court jurisdiction? We'll start with you on this one, Thomas.
Yes, child's brain isn't done developing by like 23.
Yes, I agree as well.
Should biomass, meaning burning wood, play a role in emissions reduction strategies? Starting with you, David.
I actually think it should. I know that's not the ideal out there, but if we cut that out, we're using more fossil fuel in the current system.
Thomas?
Yes, and we need to invest in solar and wind.
Thank you. Do you support overdose prevention centers? Starting with Thomas.
Yes.
David?
Yes, and have been actively vocal about that.
Where do you get your news, aside from Town Meeting TV, of
Aside from
course?
Town Meeting TV.
Starting with David.
I get it from Town Meeting TV, I get it from the New York Times, I get it from VPR, I get it from Digger. I watch a little bit of MSNBC and a little bit of Fox News to make sure I kind of hear some other perspectives that are out there as well, but mostly from Vermonters.
Great, thanks. Thomas?
Yeah, Town Meeting TV, of course. WCAX, VT Digger, VPR, Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, not VPR, Vermont Public.
Vermont Public. Good catch.
I'll stick with the R.
Will you support the Democratic nominee in this race if you do not win this primary? Starting with you, Thomas.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great. And what's your favorite ice cream in Vermont? Perhaps the toughest question on this list, starting with you, David.
Well, I really do eat a lot of Ben & Jerry's flavors, but if it's a creamy, it's a maple creamy from Palmer's Sugar House.
Nice. Scoops in Brattleboro.
Okay, all the way down in Brattleboro.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a caller here, and this is probably our last question of the night.
Sure.
Hopefully the phone works here. Let's see if we... Hello there, you're on Town Meeting TV's Candidate Forum. Can you share your name and where you're calling from?
Yes, hi, I'm Jim calling from St. Johnsbury. Thanks so much for doing this, Bobby, and thanks for me.
Awesome. Can you share your question for the two candidates?
Yeah, actually my question is more directed towards Lieutenant Governor, if that's okay.
We're going to give equal time for both candidates to respond, so if you can try to give it, make it a question that both folks can respond to.
Yeah, perfect. Talking about, I think both candidates have talked about their experience, both in Winooski and statewide. And I'm just curious. I mean, the Lieutenant Governor mentioned earlier the tone, the energy shift in the national conversation that we're having, and I guess for both candidates, can you talk a little bit about why people should be getting excited about your candidacy in this moment? Where Biden has been a great president, but it was time for the old white straight wealthy male to retire for a new younger generation of color leader. So I'm curious if both can speak to kind of your readiness to take on that issue and carry that energy forward in Vermont. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for your question. And we'll start with you, Lieutenant Governor. Why should folks be excited about your campaign?
Sure.
90 seconds.
Well, I would guess a couple things. One is at 52, I don't think I'm quite over the hill yet. I've got a few more good years to offer for public service. But with respect to Vermonters and the issues and the needs we have, the experience and knowledge I have in the system is important. The depth of knowledge on the range of issues, from property taxes to climate to affordable housing, is important. And again, back to making sure the system will be productive. As a Lieutenant Governor, I know many of the senators and I've helped many other senators when they're new be more effective and more productive because I know how the system works. And I think it's really important in this moment of democracy and decorum that knowing how the system works and making sure everybody has their voice at the table, from the Senate, on the floor, in committees, is really important. And I think I bring climate passion, good food, local food passion, social justice issues to the table. And folks can make their choice on whether I'm sort of too old, too white, or too straight. But I have worked for everyone across the board, regardless of what my own individual demographics are.
Thanks, David. Thomas, why should folks be excited about your campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of why I ran and came to this decision is because folks were talking to me all the time, and as I was talking to Vermonters, we talk a lot about wanting to empower our young leaders, wanting to empower diverse people to be in statewide leadership, and that's why I'm excited to run. I am a young black gay man from Winooski, our most diverse city in Vermont, a city that we are doing really well with and thriving in terms of our economy. And I'm excited to bring that energy to Montpelier. I'm excited to bring something new, a new voice. You're not as old as President Biden is, but it was exciting to see President Biden pass that torch on and recognize this is a great Democrat and Kamala Harris, somebody who can continue to be the voice of the party. And as Vermont changes and as Vermont grows, the voice of the party looks more and more like me. And I'm excited to be running and hope to bring that voice to Montpelier.
Thank you both so much. So we've got a couple minutes left, actually just 1 minute left. So 30-second closing statements here, if we can try to be succinct, and we'll start with you, Thomas Renner, your closing statement.
Sure. So I'm Thomas Renner. I'm looking to bring new leadership to Montpelier, leadership that represents the regular Vermonter, leadership that represents where Vermont is going and not where it has been and what we can do. I'll dedicate myself full-time to the job of Lieutenant Governor, making sure that I'm a voice that represents absolutely every single Vermonter. Thank you for watching. Thank you for moderating. Thank you, David, for being here with me at another forum.
Absolutely.
This has been great. Thank you so much. And vote August 13th. Go to thomasforvermont.com to learn more. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Thomas. David, your closing statement.
Well, absolutely. I'll add one more piece on the why folks should vote for me election matter, which is that as Lieutenant Governor, you have to be prepared to be governor on a moment's notice. And I do think experience matters. And someone like Kamala Harris, who is older than me, is ready for that job in the same way that I'm ready for the job, having been Lieutenant Governor for a number of years and served in various public office. But also, I want to put out there that I've had the support of a lot of working people. Every union that's endorsed in this race has endorsed me, whether it's the teachers union, whether it's the state employees, the professional firefighters of Vermont. And so that's one thing. Another is I've got more senatorial and House member endorsements for that track record and experience that I have. Climate leaders like Bill McKibben. So I hope folks will support me for that experience, and I'm ready to keep tackling the issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. We always wish we could have more time here, but that's all the time we have. So thank you for joining, and thank you for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's coverage of this election season. You can go out and vote on August 13th in the primary, and keep tuning into Town Meeting TV for more coverage. Thanks so much, and so long.